Hey everybody, we're going to look at a little bit more advanced API work today. We're going to update data, we're going to create data actually first, then we're going to delete data. So if you remember from last week, we used the get HTTP method all over the place in order to just retrieve data. However, for the actions of creating, updating, and deleting, we need to use different HTTP verbs because that's the convention for saying we want to do something. A particular type of action. We use an HTTP verb. In our case, post means to perform the action of creating something, put means the action of updating something, and delete means, well, means the action of deleting something. So we have access to a new type of data this week now that we're doing put, post, and delete. We have access to something called the request body. Now the request body is an interesting piece of data because it allows us to send a bunch of data to the server rather than just something in the URL. Now we can still send things via the URL when we send a request body, so these put, post, and delete commands have request parameters, they have a query string parameters, they still have headers and cookies and so on, but they also will be able to have this, request body, which I've highlighted right now. Because we're using Express, which is a very modern web server, we're also allowed to just submit JavaScript objects and submit them as JSON, which makes it much cleaner to manipulate data because we're able to, ignore that. Now, it makes it much cleaner to manipulate our data because we're able to send JSON from this front end, which will use JavaScript to write this data in, and because we can just very easily make JSON in any language at this point usually. So it's very common now to send JSON back and forth between the server. Now this week we'll be expanding on our blog API just a tiny bit, the same one that we saw last week for the most part. There's been a few added methods, and we'll take a look at that. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to load up this program called Postman. Postman is going to allow us to create, configure, and send requests to our servers from an easier to use application. What Postman allows us to do is allows us to set up an HTTP verb pointed at a particular URL and send a request. Now we can add parameters, we can add bodies to anything that's not a GET request, and so on very easily. So let's just take a look at our first request. It's the GET request for the /users route. And that will show us the list of users. Now we needed to do that to get this identifier because we're going to jump right into making a blog post. So we want to create a blog post, and we'll title it Lecture Video Blog Post. And now if you notice, by the way, we're typing this in the body tab. We set our method to post, we pointed our URL to /posts. Now we've set up a route in your code in the /posts file for lecture 6 code that will, where is it, there it is, we'll do a couple of things. The first of these things is we'll define a route that is only accessed when we post to /posts/nothing. And then what we do, something new, is we reference the object called the request body. Now in app.js, if you go over there, you'll see that we do, before we configure any routes, this thing called app.use bodyparser.json. You'll need to do this in every single Express application you write going forward. The body parser module is a middleware. The package is exports itself as a series of middlewares. Now middlewares are just things that the servers run on every request, or a set of requests. And in our case, the bodyparser.json middleware will be applied before our routes are applied, so that by the time a route gets the request, its body has been parsed if one exists. So the bodyparser.json will look through every single body of the request, every single request body, and try and parse them into an object by doing JSON parse on them. So if we submit JSON to the server, it will be able to successfully give us a request body that's just an object, which we will see by putting a breakpoint over here. So we know what we want in a blog post. Now we have a little more data. We've got tags as well. We'll set our poster ID. And so now we're going to set our body. We're going to send a body, rather. You'll notice that I set this to raw the type, and the content type to JSON, which is application/JSON. Let's name the body hello class. And you'll see we can submit an array, we could submit an object, we can submit an array of objects, whatever we want. So let's send that off. And you'll notice we use this request body, and you'll see that we have that object that we posted just the same way. We have body, hello class, poster ID is my ID. There's two tags, testing and lecture, and we have the title, lecture video blog post, which is excellent. And so you'll notice after the request fires, we get a response back. In our case, because it's sent back as JSON, it'll format it for us, and we get the ID, we get the title, the body of the post, some information about the poster, which is me, and the tags that were in the post. Now, if we wanted to update that post, we would point this to a similar route. We'd first set our request method to put, then we go to posts, and then we'd snag that ID, and snag that ID, and let's set up a body. We set it to raw, we set it to application/JSON, and we're going to copy many of these things over. We're not going to change those things because we only want to update, say, we'll update tags and we'll update body. So instead of hello class, we'll do, let's update the body. Let's update the tags and body. Testing, lecture, update. Now, let's make sure that's configured right, and let's send it. No, we got an error. Now, the error is coming back as HTML. I wonder why, because it should not. Oh, that's because I had a syntax error. No. Let's see, what was that? Get post is post data dot get post by ID. Let's reboot that server. And let's resend that request. Well, we got an error, which is bad. I'm not going to lie. But the error isn't being populated, so let's go step through a debugger and try and figure that out. That's probably another syntax error, given how I set it up. Updated post is not defined, so that means I have another issue here. Post, let's correct that right now. Oh, of course. We accidentally named the variable the same thing. And actually, we can take out that whole part. And what we can say is just set any changed field. Well, actually, we don't want to do that. We could, but we don't want to. We'll say updated post data, and if updated post dot tags, updated post data dot tags equal updated post dot tags, we'll allow them to change the body or the tags or the title. And we'll say if updated post.body Alright, so let's try that again. Alright, so now that ran that time, and if you notice, it says let's update the tags and body, and then it set it to testing, lecture, and update. And that's because we use some of our more advanced MongoDB to only set fields that we supply and change. So now we've used the put thing, we've solved some errors on the way. Let's see what happens when we try and create something now. Let's make sure the error checking's in. Well, let's see what happens when we try and make a user though. And let's see what happens, particularly when we try and make a user that doesn't have any proper data in it. So let's set up a body. Let's say raw JSON. If you notice, I tried to create a user that had no data. So that didn't work, and we actually got a nicely formatted error saying you must provide a first name. This is what's happening here. It says if not user info, you must provide data. If not user info to first name, you must provide a first name, and so on. So let's provide a first name, fill2. And you'll notice that JSON has to be surrounded in quotes, by the way. It says you must provide a last name because we've got some error checking here, which you'll copy this pattern down accordingly for the rest of lectures. So that's how we would do some basic error checking. Now, what if we wanted to update somebody, update a post that didn't exist? Say we shift that ID around, you'll notice that we get a post not found error now. Now, these are all the sorts of errors that you have to take care of. You have to say, okay, are they trying to access a resource that actually exists? Are they supplying the proper things to update, and so on? Or is everything in the right format, and so on and so forth? So that'll be something you have to factor in for the rest of the course. So now let's get this back, and let's do the last act, and let's delete our resource. Now, deleting a resource is very easy. We don't have to send anything in the body, we just have to send this deletion. And you'll notice we just got a response of OK. That's exactly what I told the server to do. I told it to send a 200 status code, and because there's not much else you'd ever want to send about that, just want it to be acknowledged as true. You could send the user down some JSON that describes that the action occurred. It's up to you, really. So those are some basics of error checking. Actually, we've got a... Oh, yeah. That happened when I didn't submit proper JSON. And so that was some basic error checking in there. You'll notice that these route files are getting larger, they're getting more verbose, but it's a lot of the same stuff repeated over and over again. So that's updating, creating, and deleting via an API. And is there anything else to cover for this one? If you take a look through these, you'll see some more advanced Mongo tactics as well, and you'll just see some other stuff, just as a demonstration purpose. So that's those additional API methods. Error checking I cannot stress the importance of it. It's an extremely important topic in computer science. It's extremely important in web development because users will always find a way to either accidentally or on purpose crash your application. So you need to factor in as many cases as you can. That being said, that's all there is to talk about on this topic. So if you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Have a great night.